My name is Mikayla Mangle. I am a legal fellow and staff attorney at the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. I think with my environmental and kind of property law background really started in undergrad. So I went to Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I majored in environmental studies and political science, and that's where I really learned about environmental justice. I never really heard about that before, kind of growing up in a very small town in South Carolina. We just didn't know about environmental justice, just environmental issues affected the environment. We never really thought about the people aspect. So when I went to college and I put those two majors of environmental science and policy together, I learned about how things affect people, specifically Black and Brown communities, poor communities. And that really made me develop this passion for environmental justice issues and working to fight against those. So I went to law school and I worked in the environmental law clinic as a student attorney, where I got to kind of put what I learned from undergrad kind of into practice a little bit as a student attorney. And I actually worked with communities who were facing environmental justice issues in Louisiana. So I think that's what really geared my interest to making a whole career focused on environmental justice issues and vulnerable communities who have just historically been taken advantage of by developers and just oil and coal industry, that kind of thing. Going back to the history that Black people, communities in the Low Country of South Carolina were not able to use their land in a way that they could make a profit off of it, which allowed it so they could not form generational wealth in any sense. But the early 1900s, there were a lot of Black farmers, way more than we see today. And ever since, I think it was 1910, 1912, there's been a sharp decline in Black farmers, which speaks to that environmental justice piece. And that was all by design. It wasn't just Black people were oh, we don't want to farm anymore. They weren't getting the loans that white farmers were getting, simply because of discrimination, not because they weren't good farmers or anything like that. They just weren't getting the same loans to be able to develop their farm and continue farming to make a profit off of it. So there's a court case called Pickford versus Glickman. I think it was in 1999, but it's one of the biggest class action lawsuits. A lot of Black farmers sued the USDA for loan discrimination, simply because they were not getting the same loans that their white counterparts were getting. And there was a huge payout to Black farmers from the USDA because of that discrimination. So that just shows that Black people were not able to utilize their land to make a profit, which meant that even though they got that big payout, it didn't really right the past wrongs. It was just kind of giving them money. So a lot of them had to abandon their land, leave their land for another line of work because they couldn't make money farming, which was probably a family tradition, but they could no longer keep up with that. Charleston, historically, there is a long history of racism, obviously, especially when it comes to property ownership and minorities. Way back, post-Civil War, post-emancipation, a lot of formerly enslaved people were deeded land by either their former white, slave owners or just wealthy white people who left the area. And they were able to keep this land in their family for 50 years, 100 years sometimes we see. But the issue is there was never really any trust in the legal system. So a lot of Black people back then did not make wills or go through the legal process to transfer their land when somebody passes away into the name of a living person. So what we see is a lot of people have interest in this heirs property, and it creates a lot of issues in the legal sense. So there's no clear title. They can't get a mortgage. Their land is very vulnerable to developers preying on them and kind of forcing a sale so that they can build these beach homes or condos, which we see a lot in Beaufort, South Carolina, around the beach. So historically, this has always been an issue for this community, just a lack of trust in the legal system, just because the legal system was used in a sense to take their land from them. So that's the main thing we would see in Charleston. And that's really why the Center for Heirs Property Center formed so that we can protect these families and right the wrong of the past legal system and past lawyers taking advantage of this group of people and kind of teaching them the law and giving them the tools so that they can protect their land and clear title to their land, so that they can continue to keep that land in their family for generations, and not only keep it, but be able to make a profit off of it and form that generational wealth. So now at the center, we have our forestry department who helps these families find ways where they can profitize off their land, whether that's through tree farming, timber, whatever it is, just planting trees so that they can actually farm their land and make a profit off of their land. That's a huge part of righting that past wrong, and a huge part of environmental justice that we do at the Center for Heirs Property, because a lot of these families don't know the programs that are out there. Most people don't know the programs that are out there, especially to heirs property owners, because there's a lot of things heirs property owners can't participate in because they don't have clear title, right? So they can't get loans, they can't get mortgages. But our foresters can show them that there are opportunities for them, even if they don't have a clear title yet, because it is really expensive to go about clearing title to heirs property. So even if they don't have that clear title yet, our foresters can teach them, here are the programs that you can utilize now, even with an unclear title, to help you start utilizing that land more. And when you utilize that land more, you're less likely to be taken advantage of by, a developer. You're also making money, so you can keep up with the property taxes that you have to pay. So you're less likely for your land to be sold at a tax auction if you no longer can pay the taxes. And it's also a way to build that generational wealth that was lost so many years ago. A lot of politicians, when they look at property, they're only looking at how much money can we make off of it. They're not taking into account the culture of the property, the history of the property, the family ties that property has, especially in the Low Country. So we do have these historic preservation laws. They preserve the former plantations, they preserve some cemeteries, big monuments like that. But I think there needs to be that same kind of law when it comes to talking about just family land. I mean, because if you think about it, Black people were able to buy property, sometimes as early as the late 1800s. We've seen deeds that are from the 1870s, 1880s. And that's pretty remarkable for a Black person who was once deemed property not that long ago to go back and buy a piece of property, possibly a piece of property they were formerly enslaved on. That is incredibly remarkable. And then they keep it in their family for hundreds of years, and it's still there. And it's, they still may have a family cemetery there. They still may have some of the houses that their ancestors lived in. I think those are things that need to be preserved. I think there's still developers that will look at that and be oh, this is technically waterfront property. This would be a great place for a high-rise apartment or a golf course. But in reality, it's not. It's a piece of history. And it's so remarkable that these families have been able to keep the land in their family for so long. So I think we just need laws that really focus more on the history value of property and not just the monetary value. We have some really great resources at the center. We do wills, which is just really important for everyone to have. We do power of attorneys and healthcare power of attorneys too. Our forestry department does so much good work, not only helping landowners kind of figure out how to utilize their land and make a profit off their land, but they also reach out to the youth a lot. Our forestry department does a really good job of getting younger generations involved in forestry and land. So they had, I think it was a camp. I think it was 3 to 12-year-olds come out, and they kind of taught them about vegetables and how they grow, and everyone got to kind of pick their harvest. And I love that because I think it's so important to kind of come back and be connected to the land and the roots. And I think it's so important because a lot of younger generations nowadays don't know about that. Like they don't know that, oh, like, oh, this potato grows, from the ground. Like people don't know that anymore because we're so disconnected from our food, which is another big passion of mine, is like food systems. So it's kind of like all related. And yeah, I think my hope is that for younger generations in general to just get more involved with like farming and land ownership and kind of really coming back to the land and owning land, because I think it's really important.